She found it on a Wednesday in July, which was not the kind of day that announces itself. No dramatic weather, no feeling of significance in the air, just low water and a blue haze of heat above the Virginia hills, and the particular silence of being somewhere that nobody expects you to be. By the end of this story, I'm also going to share something special with those of you who stick around to the end, something that can help you in your personal life. But first, let's get back to the river was called Copper Run, fed into the Shenandoah about 4 miles east of where Iris was standing, ankle-deep in water the color of weak tea, yanking Japanese knotweed from the bank with both hands and tossing it into the orange mesh collection bags she dragged behind her on a rope tied to her belt loop. She was 12 days into a 3-week seasonal contract with a state environmental firm, clearing invasive species from a 5-mile stretch of the river. The pay was $14.75 an hour, cash at the end of each Friday. She had been happy when they offered it. Happy was maybe too strong a word. Relieved was more accurate. Relieved the way you were when the math started working again after weeks, when it refused to. The morning had passed without incident. She had worked upstream, turned around near the concrete culvert beneath Route 9, and was now heading back toward the staging area where the contractor's white pickup would collect her at 4. The sun was behind her, low and glaring off the water, which meant she was mostly working by feel, reaching into silt and gravel with gloved hands and pulling out whatever her fingers found. Her fingers found it about 300 yards from the staging area. It was lodged between 2 pale stones, mostly buried, only a small curved edge showing above the silt line. She almost missed it. Would have missed it any other year, but the summer had been dry and the water was running unusually low, exposing stretches of riverbed that had not seen air in decades. She pulled the curved edge and felt resistance, worked it loose with her thumb, and came up with something that looked, at first glance, like a bent bottle cap gone black with age. She almost tossed it into the collection bag by reflex. Instead, she held it up against the light, turned it, felt the weight of it, which was more substantial than she expected. Ring. Gold, maybe, under the oxidation that had turned it the color of coal. Small, sized for a woman's finger, with a band that had gone rough and crusted at the edges, but smooth on the inner surface, where something had been engraved in letters too small to read in the glare. Iris looked at it for a long moment. Then she put it in the breast pocket of her contractor vest, fastened the snap, and went back to pulling knotweed. That was how it began, not with music or revelation. With a ring in a pocket and 3 more hours of work before she could think about anything else. She was 26 years old. She had been in the Virginia foster care system from the age of 3 days, which was when she had been left, wrapped in a hospital receiving blanket, in the waiting room of Loudoun County Medical Center. No note, no identifying information, no one who came back to claim her. County gave her a name using the standard practice for foundlings at the time, which was to take the surname of one of the county's oldest established families in the belief, or maybe just the habit, that it gave children a thread to catch on to. The family name they chose was Vane. The first name was written by the intake nurse at the hospital, who had a daughter named Iris and thought it was a name that deserved to belong to more people. So she became Iris Vane, which was not a name that came from anywhere or pointed toward anything. It was a name assembled from pieces of other people's lives and handed to her like the receiving blanket she had arrived in. She had spent 18 years in 4 different foster placements. The first 2 were fine, which in the language of social workers meant nothing alarming had been documented. Third was a large group home in Manassas, where she shared a room with 5 other girls and learned to keep her things in a zipped bag under her mattress and not make eye contact during meal times if she did not want to invite conversation. The fourth was a couple in Reston, Dennis and Terry, who were kind in the way that some people were kind, which is to say consistently and without drama, which she had not known was possible until she was 16 and living there. She stayed with them until she aged out at 18. Dennis had driven her to the DMV to get her license. Terry had co-signed the lease on a studio apartment in Sterling that Iris managed to hold for 14 months before the management company raised the rent by $300, and she could not make the gap. After that, she had moved 4 times in 3 years. A room in a house in Purcellville, a couch in Herndon for 6 weeks, a month in her car while she figured out the next thing, a room in another house in Warrenton where the landlord did not ask questions and accepted cash. She had worked as a cashier, a warehouse sorter, a home health aide for 8 months before the agency collapsed and left everyone unpaid for their final 2 pay periods. She had done 2 seasons of outdoor restoration work, which was how she had found the state contractor who hired her for the Copper Run job. Her car was a 2003 Honda Civic with 187,000 miles on it and a crack in the rear passenger side window she had covered with packing tape 3 winters ago. She had $418 in a checking account and about $60 in cash. She had a backpack with 2 pairs of work pants, 3 shirts, a hoodie, a toiletry bag, her GED diploma in a manila envelope, a library card, and a charging cable that had been repaired with electrical tape twice. She had a phone on a prepaid plan. She had her contractor badge, her water shoes, and the orange vest she wore every day above the Copper Run. That was the inventory of Iris Vane at 26. It did not take long to recite. 4 o'clock, the contractor's truck appeared, and she loaded her collection bags and climbed into the cab alongside Pete, a 50-year-old retired firefighter who ran these seasonal crews every summer and talked most about his tomato garden. Dropped her at the staging area parking lot, signed her hours sheet, and told her he would see her Thursday. She thanked him, climbed into the Civic, and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. The rest stop on Route 7 was 8 miles east. She had been parking there at night for the past 12 days. It had lights and bathrooms and enough overnight truck traffic that one small car did not attract notice. She drove there now, changed out of her work clothes in the bathroom, ate a gas station sandwich, sitting in the driver's seat with the windows down, and then, when the parking lot had gone mostly quiet and the evening light was turning the sky pink above the tree line, she took the ring out of her vest pocket and set it on the dashboard. It sat there looking unremarkable. The size of a coat button, black with oxidation, bent slightly at one point on the band where it had probably been pressed into the riverbed for a very long time. She picked it up and found the paper towels from the bathroom still folded in her pocket. She wet one with water from her bottle and started working. The oxidation came off slowly. Not perfectly, not with any dramatic reveal, just in patches. The way tarnish always came off when you did not have the right tools and were doing it by hand. Under it, gold appeared. Real gold, not plating, catching the parking lot light with a warmth that surprised her. The band was plain on the outside except for a very fine pattern of leaves barely visible at the center section. The side was different. The engraving was small, careful, and deeply cut, the kind of work done by someone who expected it to last. She had to hold the ring under the car's dome light and tilt it 4 different ways before she could read it cleanly. When she finally could, she read it twice. I.R.V. Hartwell, You Are Always Claimed, M.H. 1999. She looked at it for a long time after that. long enough that the dome light timer clicked off and she had to press the door handle again to turn it back on. R.V. Her initials were I.V. She had no middle name on any document she had ever been given. Her name as recorded by the county was Iris Vane, 2 names, no middle, but the ring said I.R.V. The V was there, and the I was there, and whoever had engraved this had done it in 1999, which was the year she was born. Hartwell, she did not know the word. It did not mean anything to her, did not connect to any memory or fragment from any of the 4 foster placements or the conversations with social workers over 18 years. She tried to think if Vane and Hartwell were connected in any way she knew about. Nothing came. Someone with initials MH had given this ring to someone with initials I.R.V. in 1999. You are always claimed. Not you will be claimed, or you were claimed, but the present tense, the permanent tense, as if the claiming were an ongoing state rather than a completed action. She sat in the dark parking lot on Route 7 in Loudoun County, Virginia, holding a ring that was probably not hers, and felt something shift in her chest that she did not immediately have a name for. She opened her phone and searched. Hartwell, Virginia. The results came back immediately. A landscaping company in Richmond, a dentist's office in Harrisonburg, neighborhood in Stafford County. Then, on the second page of results, Hartwell House, Clark County, Virginia. Historical Registry of Virginia Properties, listed 1987. She clicked it. The entry was brief and administrative, the kind of language historic registries used, full of measurements and dates. But the photograph at the top of the page stopped her. It was a large Georgian manor house, 3 stories of pale brick with tall windows and a shallow portico, set back from a gravel drive lined with oak trees so old their canopies met overhead. Behind the house, a formal garden ran to a stone wall, and beyond the wall, open farmland stretched toward a line of Blue Ridge foothills that looked, in the afternoon light of the photograph, like a painting somebody had put there on purpose. Caption read, Hartwell House, Est. 87, Clark County, Virginia. Currently held in estate proceedings, not open to the public. She searched further. Clark County property records, Hartwell Estate. She found fragments, legal notices, a reference in a local newspaper archive from 2003 about ongoing probate proceedings for the estate of Margaret Hartwell, who had died intestate in July 1999. This estate meant without a will. The article mentioned a distant cousin, Warren Hartwell of Alexandria, who had petitioned the court to be named estate administrator on a temporary basis while the estate was settled. The article noted that Margaret Hartwell had no known surviving relatives. July 1999. Iris put the phone face down on the passenger seat and looked at the parking lot for a while. Moths circled the overhead lights. A semi-truck pulled in and parked at the far end, its engine running. She picked up the phone again. She searched. Margaret Hartwell, Clark County, Virginia, death 1999. There was very little. Death notice in the Clark County Courier, 4 lines, no photograph. Margaret Rose Hartwell, 34, of Berryville, Virginia. Died July 14, 1999, following injuries sustained in a motor vehicle accident on Route 7 in Loudoun County. She is survived by no immediate family, private services. Route 7 in Loudoun County. Iris looked up from her phone at the stretch of road visible through the windshield. Route 7 ran directly past this rest stop. The river Copper Run ran roughly parallel to it for several miles. Margaret Rose Hartwell, M.H., July 14, 1999. Iris had been found in the waiting room of Loudoun County Medical Center on July 16, 1999. 2 days after Margaret Rose Hartwell died on the road that ran above the river where Iris, 26 years later, had found a ring engraved with her initials. She put the ring in the small zipped pocket on the inside of her backpack, where she kept the things that mattered most. Then she lay down across the back seat the way she had learned to sleep in the car, knees bent, hoodie balled under her head, and stared at the ceiling until her eyes stopped working. She did not sleep until past 2 in the morning. When she did not dream. Thursday passed in the ordinary way of days that come after the day everything changes. Pulled knotweed. Pete talked about his tomatoes. Heat pressed down on the river valley and made the air smell like hot stone and green things decomposing in the shallows. She worked through it with the mechanical focus she had always been able to summon when thinking would have made things worse. But she was also, underneath the work and the routine and the careful blankness, doing calculations. There were too many coincidences stacked in the same direction. She had been found 2 days after a woman died on the road above this river. That woman's initials matched the second set of initials on the ring. The year on the ring matched the year Iris was born. The first set of initials on the ring included an I, a V, and an R, and the county had given her the name Iris Vane, which left an R unaccounted for. R. She had no middle name on any document she had ever held. But what if there was supposed to be one? What if Margaret Hartwell had named her daughter Iris Rose before she died, and the ring had been made to mark that naming, and the county had not known about the middle name because there was no one alive to tell them? Iris Rose Vane, I.R.V. She said it once quietly into the space above the river, testing how it sounded. Did not sound like anything yet. It was just an arrangement of letters trying to become something real. Friday, she collected her pay, $590 after taxes. She thanked Pete, shook his hand, and told him she would not be back for the final week. He looked at her with the neutral acceptance of a man who had run enough seasonal crews to know that people left without explanation and that it was rarely about him. He told her she had been a good worker and that he would give her a reference if she needed one. She said she appreciated that and meant it. She drove west on Route 7 toward Clark County, which was 42 miles from where she had found the ring. The land changed as she drove. Northern Virginia's dense suburban edge softened, then fell away entirely, replaced by horse farms and old stone walls and stretches of forest where the road narrowed and the trees leaned in from both sides. Clark County was one of the smallest counties in Virginia by population, shaped by the Shenandoah River on its western boundary and by the Blue Ridge on the south, cattle and apple orchards and properties that had been in the same families since before the Civil War. It was not a place that paid attention to strangers unless they gave it reason to. She found the town of Berryville in 20 minutes, a small downtown of brick buildings and a single main street with a gas station, a diner, a hardware store, and a law office with a hand-painted sign above the door that read Pemberton Property Law, Est, 1993. She parked and sat for a moment, thinking about how strange it was to drive 40 miles towards something you could not yet name and did not yet know you had a right to look for. She went into the diner first. Was called the Blue Ridge Grill, and it had been there long enough that the counter stools had permanent impressions in their vinyl seats. She ordered coffee and a ham and egg sandwich, and when the woman behind the counter, a 60-ish woman with silver hair pinned at the back, asked if she was passing through, Iris said she was looking into some county history. Family history, she added, and felt the strangeness of the word in her mouth. The woman's name was Connie. She had lived in Berryville her whole life and had opinions about most of what had happened in it. Hartwell House, Iris said. Connie's expression shifted into something complicated, something that was not quite surprise and not quite discomfort, but had elements of both. The Hartwell estate, she said, that old question. You a lawyer? No. Iris drank her coffee. Just trying to find something out. Connie looked at her for a moment, clearly deciding something. Margaret Hartwell, she said finally, was a good woman, kept to herself but good, died too young. Terrible accident. Happened right out on 7, middle of the night. Nobody knew why she was on that road at that hour. She had a baby, some people say, though nobody ever knew for sure. Warren Hartwell, her cousin, said there was no baby. Said Margaret had a stillbirth earlier that year and never recovered from it mentally. Said the accident might not have been an accident at all. She paused. I never believed that. Margaret was not that kind of woman. But Warren controlled the estate, and Warren told the story, so that was mostly the story people knew. Iris set down her coffee cup with care, and Warren is still managing it? The estate? Still managing it. Connie's voice went flat. 26 years of managing it. That estate generates income, you know. Farmland leases, the old tenant house. Not a small amount either, some years. She looked at Iris steadily. You going to tell me why you're asking? Iris reached into the inside pocket of her backpack and took out the ring. She set it on the counter between them. Connie looked at it. Then she looked at Iris. Then she looked at the ring again for a long time without speaking. Where did you get that? Asked. Her voice had changed entirely. A river, about 40 miles east. Connie picked it up with 2 fingers, the way people handled things they recognized. She turned it, found the engraving, brought it close to read it. When she set it back down, her face had gone still in the way. Faces went when emotions were being held firmly in place. Margaret used to come in here, Connie said, every Saturday morning for about 2 years, right before she died. Always sat at that end stool. Always ordered the same thing, eggs over easy and wheat toast. She was pregnant the last year she came in, visibly pregnant toward the end. She paused. She never said much about it, but she was happy about that baby. That was clear. Whatever else was going on with her, she was happy about that baby. Iris did not trust herself to speak for a moment. She asked if Connie knew a property lawyer in town. Connie slid the ring back across the counter. Go see Louise Pemberton. She said it like it was a conclusion that had already been reached. Office is right up the street. Tell her Connie sent you. Tell her you've got something she needs to see. Louise Pemberton was 53 years old and had practiced property and probate law in Clark County for 29 years. She had a direct way of speaking that suggested she had spent those years around people who tried to waste her time and had stopped tolerating it. Her office was small and organized in the specific way of people who knew where everything was and had opinions about the fact that nothing was ever where you left it. She shook Iris's hand once, sat her down, and said, Connie called ahead. Show me what you've got. Iris showed her the ring, the engraving, the search results on her phone about Margaret Hartwell's death, the date she had been found at the medical center, which she had memorized from the copy of her original intake record that a social worker had given her at 17 because she had asked for it. She laid it out in the order it had come to her, without embellishment, watching Louise's face carefully. Louise did not interrupt. She wrote 3 things on a notepad while Iris spoke, and when Iris finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for about 10 seconds. Before we find out what happened next in the story, I want to take a brief moment to speak directly to anyone watching who might be going through their own sudden, overwhelming transition. If you are navigating a bitter divorce, the loss of a spouse, or a financial shock, you know the hardest part isn't just the money, it's not knowing what to do first. That is exactly why we created the Phoenix Blueprint. It is a practical, step-by-step guide for starting over. It doesn't have fluffy affirmations or vision boards. It is a tactical survival manual. It gives you the exact checklist for the first 48 hours, including the one rule you must follow. Do not make any decision you cannot reverse. It includes the Found Money worksheet, showing you exactly how to check state databases, because 1 in 7 Americans actually has unclaimed money waiting for them right now. It even gives you word-for-word boundary scripts to use when family members pressure you for money or try to make decisions for you. You can get the entire guide right now for just $17. If you're watching on your TV, just pull out your phone, open your camera, and scan the QR code on the screen right now. If you're on a computer or phone, click the top link in the description. You don't have to figure this out alone. Now, let's get back to the story. I.R.V, she said. You have no documentation of a middle name, no. Warren Hartwell's position has always been that Margaret had no living child, that there was a pregnancy that ended badly, and Margaret fell into a depression that contributed to the accident. He filed that version with the court in 2000 when he was petitioning for estate administrator status. Was accepted because there was no evidence to contradict it. Is there evidence to contradict it now? Louise looked at the ring. Maybe. A ring with those initials and that date is not nothing. The question is what else exists. Margaret was careful. She was organized. Maybe she had a child she was planning to keep. There would be documentation somewhere. A birth record. A hospital file. Something she wrote down. Found Iris at Loudoun County Medical Center, Iris said, not Clark County, which is not where Margaret would have given birth if she had had time to choose. Louise tapped her pen on the notepad. Route 7 accident, middle of the night, baby found 2 days later in a hospital waiting room 40 miles from Berryville. That is a timeline that holds together. She paused. I have been watching this estate for 15 years. Something about how Warren manages it has never sat right with me. He takes a substantial administrative fee annually. The estate has never been properly closed out because there is always some procedural reason to extend the administration period. He owns a house in Alexandria worth about $2 million that he bought in 2004 on an administrator's salary that should not have allowed it. Iris was quiet for a moment. How much is the estate worth? Louise looked at her steadily. Properly appraised, with the trust value added in, a 2024 estimate I had done informally, we are discussing somewhere in the range of $420 million. The number sat in the room between them. It did not feel real to Iris. Numbers that large never felt real in the way that $418 in a checking account felt real, or $590 in weekly pay felt real. Was an abstraction, a figure that existed in a different dimension from the one she currently occupied. She said, "What do we need to do?" Louise said, "We need a DNA test. We need to find Margaret's medical records from 1999. We need to find out if there is any documentation of a birth that night or in the days before the accident. We need to do all of this quietly before Warren Hartwell finds out you exist." Hartwell House was on a private road 4 miles outside Berryville, at the end of a gravel drive lined with the same oak trees she had seen in the historic registry photograph. Louise drove her out that afternoon in her own car, saying that it was important for Iris to see it with her own eyes before anything formal happened, and important to meet Agnes Whitfield, who had been the house caretaker for 30 years. Iris had prepared herself to feel nothing in particular. She was good at preparing herself to feel nothing in particular. She had been doing it her whole life in situations where feeling things led directly to other things that were harder to manage. She had prepared herself as they drove the 4 miles out of town and turned onto the gravel drive and passed under the oak canopy, which was exactly as the photograph had shown it. 2 rows of enormous old trees whose highest branches laced together overhead and turned the afternoon light into something slow and amber. Preparation did not entirely hold. The house was larger than the photograph had suggested. 3 stories of pale brick the mortar gone the color of old cream with age, the windows tall and 12-paned in the Georgian style, the portico shallow and supported by 4 squared columns that had been repainted at some point but were showing their age again at the corners. Formal gardens behind it were overgrown but not abandoned. Someone had keeping the grass cut and the paths visible, though the beds themselves had gone wild with years of unattended growth. Iris got out of the car and stood on the gravel and looked at it. She did not know what she felt. It was too much of something, and she could not find the word for it. The closest thing was the feeling she had had at 17. Standing in Dennis and Terry's kitchen at 7 in the morning, when Terry had put a plate of eggs and toast in front of her before she had asked for it, and she had understood, slowly and with difficulty, that this was what it meant when someone knew what you needed without being told. Was that feeling, but much larger, and attached to something she did not yet have the right to attach it to. Louise called out to the house, and a woman appeared from around the side, drying her hands on a work cloth. Agnes Whitfield was 71, lean and brown from outdoor work, with white hair cut close and eyes that were darker and sharper than her age suggested. She walked toward them with the unhurried pace of someone who owned their own time on this land, and when she got close enough to see Iris clearly, she stopped. She stood absolutely still. The silence lasted long enough that Louise said gently, "Agnes." Agnes looked at Iris for another moment. Then she looked at Louise, then back at Iris. "Where did you find her?" she said. Her voice was low and had something in it that Iris could not read. "She found herself, Agnes." Louise's voice was careful. "She found a ring in a river." Agnes put her hand over her mouth. She stood that way for a moment, and Iris watched her work through something that was clearly large and had been waiting a long time to have somewhere to go. Then Agnes took her hand down and breathed in steadily and said, "Come inside." The house was cooler than the afternoon outside, and it smelled of old wood and something floral that came from a bowl of dried herbs on the entrance hall table. Agnes led them through a wide central hallway with crown molding and a staircase that curved up and out of sight, past doorways that opened into rooms with furniture under dust covers, everything preserved and still and waiting. She took them to the kitchen, which was the only room that felt currently lived in, warm from the afternoon sun coming through west-facing windows, a worn wooden table at the center with 4 mismatched chairs. She put a kettle on and stood at the stove with her back to them for a moment, composing herself in the way people did when they needed to not cry in front of strangers. Then she turned around and looked at Iris. "The cheekbones," she said, "and the way you stand." She shook her head slowly. "I have been waiting 26 years for this, and now that you are here, I do not know what to say first." "Tell me about Margaret," Iris said. Agnes sat down. She folded her hands on the table, looked at them, then looked at Iris. "Margaret Rose Hartwell was the finest person I have ever known. Smart in a way that did not need to show itself. Generous with her time and her money and her patience, and she had all 3 to give. She came to this house when she was 8 years old, when her parents died, and she grew up here in her grandfather's care. She never left, never wanted to leave. House and this land were the things she loved most in the world, until she got pregnant. Then you were," she paused, "you were what she loved most." Iris sat with that for a moment. "How much did you know about what happened?" Agnes was quiet. "I knew she was in trouble toward the end." Warren had been pressuring her for years about the estate, about what happened when she died, about who got what. She would not make a will that excluded you. She would not even discuss it. She was going to register you at birth, give you her name, bring you home here. She had your room ready on the 3rd floor, small room, south-facing, good light in the morning. She looked out the kitchen window. I do not know why she was on Route 7 that night. She called me that evening, said she needed to take care of something, that she would be back in the morning. She never came back. 2 days later, you were found in the hospital waiting room in Loudoun County, and nobody knew who you were. Tried to tell Warren. I told him about the baby, that Margaret had been pregnant, that the baby must be Iris. He had told me your name, Iris Rose, after her grandmother. What did he do? Iris asked. He told me I was grieving and confused. He told me Margaret had miscarried in March, and the pregnancy had not been viable. He produced paperwork, a doctor's note, something official looking. I did not know how to fight it. I was just the caretaker. I did not have a lawyer, did not have any standing. He had the courts and the money and the position, and I had nothing but what I knew to be true. She looked at Iris directly. What I know to be true is sitting across from me right now. That was when they heard the car on the gravel drive. Louise stood and went to the window. She came back to the table with an expression that told Iris before she spoke, "That is Warren Hartwell's car." Was 61 years old, and dressed in the studied casualness of men who had enough money to pretend they did not care about appearances while caring about them constantly. Khaki trousers, a pressed shirt with the sleeves rolled, driving shoes that cost more than Iris's monthly earnings. Came into the kitchen without knocking because he had been coming into this house without knocking for 26 years and had stopped thinking of it as anyone else's house a long time ago. He saw Louise first and registered the inconvenience of her presence with a tightening around his eyes. Then he saw Iris, and something else moved across his face, something quick and complicated that he covered almost immediately with a smile. "Louise, I did not know you were coming out." He kept his voice warm and easy. "And who is your friend?" Iris did not offer her name. She sat at the table and watched him. Louise said, "This is Iris Vane. She has come up from Loudoun County with some information about Margaret's estate." Warren's eyes moved to Iris again, more carefully this time. The smile stayed but became fixed, in the way that smiles did when the muscles underneath were doing different work. "Iris Vane," he said. He said it like he was testing the weight of it. "I do not believe we have met." "We have not," Iris said. "And what kind of information?" His voice had shifted, barely perceptibly, from warmth to something with an edge underneath it. Louise said, "We are at a preliminary stage, Warren. Nothing formal yet, just an initial look." Turned to Louise with the full attention of a man who had learned that controlling conversations meant controlling what was discussed and with whom. "Louise, you know as well as I do that this estate has been in proper administrative proceeding for 26 years. There are no outstanding claims. Margaret died without heirs. Court has accepted that finding multiple times. That finding," Louise said carefully, "was based on the information available at the time." "What new information?" His voice was steady and pleasant and entirely without curiosity. It was the voice of a man asking a question to which he already knew the answer and was waiting to see whether anyone else did. Iris put the ring on the kitchen table. She set it in the middle of the table, the gold showing clearly now that she had finished cleaning it, the engraving visible on the inner surface if you tilted it right. She put it down and took her hand away and did not break eye contact with Warren Hartwell. He looked at the ring. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. Pleasantness drained out of his face, the way color drained out of a cloth left in the sun. What was underneath was harder and older than what had been on top. Something that had been managing its own exposure for a long time and was recalculating now. He looked up at Iris. "Where did you get that?" His voice was quiet and had lost its warmth completely. "She found it in a river," Agnes said, "from the corner of the room." He looked at Agnes, then back at Iris, then at the ring again. He picked it up, very deliberately, and put it in his shirt pocket. The room went still. That, he said, is estate property. I will be holding it until the provenance is established through proper legal channels. He straightened and looked at Louise. I assume you will be filing something with the court. I will hear from my attorney. He looked at Iris last, and the look was not angry. Anger would have been more comfortable. Was assessing, like being measured for something she did not want to be measured for. I do not know what you think you have found, Miss Vane, or what someone has told you. This estate has been under my administration for 26 years. I know every inch of it and every document attached to it. Whatever story you have been told, I promise you it is more complicated than it appears. He left without saying goodbye to anyone. Louise was already on her feet. She went to the back door, spoke briefly and quietly on her phone. Agnes had not moved from her corner. Iris sat at the table and looked at the place where the ring had been. He took it, she said. Agnes said, yes. Is that legal? Louise came back from the door. He is the current estate administrator. Claim that it is estate property is legally arguable until we can establish your connection to Margaret. Without the ring, the physical evidence is thinner. We need the DNA test, and we need those medical records before the ring matters, or does not matter anyway. She looked at Iris steadily. This is going to move fast now. He knows you exist. He will file to block any claim before we can establish one. What does he have to lose? Everything, Agnes said from the corner. She said it quietly and without drama. He has had the use of this estate for 26 years. The income, the status, the legal standing. He has built his life around being the last Hartwell. He has told himself a story about why that is true, and you are standing in that story, like something that was never supposed to appear. She crossed the kitchen and stood in front of Iris, and looked at her face for a long moment, in the direct way of people who had been waiting long enough that they were past being careful. Your mother loved you before you were born. She put your name in gold so you would know it if you ever found it. She tried to keep you safe. She did not make it, but she tried. Agnes's voice was steady. What comes next is going to be hard, and people are going to say things about you designed to make you feel like you have no right to be here. Like you are a girl who found a ring and invented a story around it. Your whole life makes you less credible, not more deserving of the truth. Iris held her gaze. You do have the right to be here, Agnes said. This is your home. It has been your home since before you were born. People who told you otherwise have been wrong for 26 years, and the time for them being wrong is almost over. Outside, through the kitchen window, the Blue Ridge foothills caught the last of the afternoon light and held it. 340 acres of farmland stretched between the house and the distant ridge line, the same oak canopy on the drive, the same stone walls, the same creek at the property's eastern edge, running clear and cold through grass that needed nobody's permission to grow. Iris looked at it. She had $418 in a checking account, a cracked Civic, and a backpack with everything she owned. She was 26 years old and had never in her life had anything that was hers in the permanent way that houses and land and names could be yours. She had been given a surname that belonged to someone else's family, and a first name that had come from a stranger's affection, and an existence assembled from other people's small kindnesses and larger indifferences. But she had been found in a hospital waiting room 2 days after a woman died on Route 7 with a ring on her finger that said, I.R.V. Hartwell, you are always claimed. And she had spent 26 years not yet knowing that. The knowing had started now. She turned back to Louise and said, Tell me what I need to do. Louise drove back to Berryville without speaking for the first few minutes, which Iris appreciated. The The road through the farmland was narrow, and the evening light was coming in at a low angle across the fields, catching the tops of the grass and turning it briefly gold before the shadow of the next tree line swallowed it. She watched it happen over and over, the light and the shadow, and tried to understand what she was in the middle of. She had found a ring in a river. She had driven 40 miles on the logic of an engraving and a date. She had sat in a kitchen with a woman who had been waiting 26 years for exactly the face now sitting across from her. She had watched a man put that ring in his pocket with the practiced calm of someone who had been ready for this moment and had prepared for it long before she arrived. That last part was what she kept returning to. Warren Hartwell had not looked surprised. Unsettled, yes. Recalculating, certainly, but not surprised in the way a person was surprised when something impossible happened. He had looked like a person who had been expecting a particular phone call for a long time and had finally heard it ring. She said to Louise, "Did he not? About me? At some level he has always known." Louise was quiet for a moment. She drove through the intersection at the edge of town and took the right that brought them back toward Main Street. "I think," she said carefully, "that Warren Hartwell made a decision in 1999 to shape the available information in a direction that served him. Whether he knew with certainty that you existed, or whether he suspected it and chose not to investigate, I cannot say yet. But the fact that he had a doctor's note prepared and ready to file within months of Margaret's death, a note claiming the pregnancy had not been viable, that tells me he was not operating in ignorance. Ignorant people do not prepare documentation." She pulled into the small lot behind her office. "People who are covering something do." They went back inside and Louise made coffee, and they sat at the conference table, and Louise opened a legal pad to a fresh page. She worked through it methodically, listing what they had and what they needed, and which of the two lists was longer. The list of what they needed was substantially longer. DNA testing was first. Without it, every other argument was circumstantial. The ring was compelling, the timeline was compelling, Agnes's testimony was compelling, but none of it was proof in the legal sense that mattered. They needed biological evidence connecting Iris to Margaret Hartwell, and for that they needed a sample from Margaret's line. Louise knew of two possibilities. Tissue samples retained from the accident investigation, which would require a court order and would be opposed vigorously by Warren's legal team, and personal items of Margaret's that might yield DNA through forensic analysis. Agnes had retained some of Margaret's clothing, kept carefully in sealed boxes in the stone outbuilding. That was the faster path. Medical records were second. Loudoun County Medical Center had closed in 2014, but its records had been transferred to the County Health Department archive. A Foundling intake record from July 1999 would be in that archive, containing whatever physical observations the intake staff had noted. Birth registration was third. Margaret had been in contact with her OB through the pregnancy. She had been in the process of filing. There might be a partial record somewhere in the state database that had never been completed. The ring itself was fourth, and here Louise was precise about why it mattered even without the physical object, now that Warren had taken it. Iris had photographed it on her phone before driving to Clark County. 4 photographs from different angles, including one that showed the engraving clearly. Those photographs existed. Warren attempted to claim the ring had always been estate property and had never been found in a river. He would need to explain why estate property bearing the initials of a child who supposedly never existed had been at the bottom of Copper Run for 26 years. Louise set down her pen and looked at Iris across the desk. "I want to be honest with you. This is a strong case on the merits. The ring, the timing, Agnes's testimony, the questions about that doctor's note. Person bringing it is a 26-year-old woman with no legal standing, no documented connection to the Hartwell family, and no money for a prolonged fight. I know, Iris said. I am not saying that to discourage you. I am saying it because we need to be strategic, not just right. Being right is not the same as winning. Iris thought about Warren Hartwell taking the ring out of her hands and putting it in his pocket and walking out of the room with the ease of someone who had been doing that kind of thing for a long time. She thought about Agnes standing in the corner of the kitchen with 26 years of waiting packed into the stillness of her face. She thought about Margaret Rose Hartwell dying on a road 40 miles from home in the middle of the night, and the question of why she had been on that road, and whether anyone had ever looked at that question with the care it deserved. "What do you need from me?" she said. Louise capped her pen and looked at her. "I need to know if you are going to stay. Not just in the county, but in this fight. This will take months, possibly longer. Warren will try to make it uncomfortable. He has connections here, and he will work on making you feel like an outsider, like someone who wandered in off the road and invented a claim out of nothing. Some people in this county have known him for 30 years, and they will default to believing him before they believe you, because that is what people do with the person they already know." Iris thought about the parking lots, the group home in Manassas, the months in the car before she found the room in Warrenton. She thought about every time in 26 years that the situation had required her to hold on to something without any guarantee that holding would lead anywhere, and the way she had held anyway, because letting go was never actually the simpler option it looked like from a distance. "I will stay," she said. Louise nodded once. "Then you are going to need somewhere to live that is not your car. Do not look surprised. Connie at the diner tells me things. There is a room above the hardware store that the owner rents by the month. Clean, cheap, no questions. I will call him tonight. That is not necessary. It is, actually. You need an address in this county before we file anything. You cannot be sleeping in a parking lot when Warren's lawyers start deposing people about your stability and your living situation." She said it matter-of-factly, without kindness performed, and without cruelty. "They will absolutely do that. They will go through your history with care. Foster care, every address you have had, every job. They will try to paint a picture of a person who has spent her life on the margins and has now constructed a story to gain access to something she has no right to. That is the case they will build. The best way to answer it is to be here, working, visible, part of this community, so that by the time we stand before a judge, the people of Clark County have had enough time to decide what kind of person you actually are." Iris sat with that for a moment. "The room above the hardware store. Is it close to the library?" Louise almost smiled. 2 blocks. Good, I will need a library card. Agnes, they called that evening after Louise had made arrangements with the hardware store owner, a quiet man named Ed, who had known Margaret Hartwell since they were both children, and who charged Iris half the usual rent without explanation. Agnes called to say that she had found the boxes of Margaret's clothing in the stone outbuilding, sealed exactly as she had left them, and that she had also found something she had not known was there. Behind the boxes, set into the lower shelf of the outbuilding storage rack, was a metal lockbox. Small, painted green, the kind sold at hardware stores. Agnes did not have the key, and she had not forced it open. Taped to its top with yellowed tape was an envelope. On the envelope, in Margaret's handwriting, "For Iris Rose, when you come home." Agnes had read the first 2 lines and then stopped and called Iris instead of reading further, because it was not hers to read. Iris drove back out to Hartwell House in the dark, past the oak trees and the stone walls, and Agnes met her at the door of the stone outbuilding with a flashlight. The lockbox sat on the shelf where she had found it, the envelope taped to its top in the steady way of things that had been waiting without impatience. Iris took the envelope with both hands. She brought it into the kitchen, into the light, and sat at the wooden table and opened it. The paper inside was cream-colored, thick, the same quality as what she would come to learn was Margaret's stationery, bought in quantity, because Margaret had believed that how you wrote was part of what you were saying. The handwriting was careful and even. "My Iris Rose," it said. "If you are reading this, you found me some other way than I intended. I intended to hand this to you myself, to tell you the story in person across this table where I am sitting right now writing it. I intended to show you this house and this land and tell you it was yours, that it had always been yours, that you were a Hartwell before you were born, and that no one could change that. Do not know what happened. I am writing this in November of 1998, and you will not be born until spring, and I have no reason to think I will not be here. But something in me needs to put this down on paper. Maybe it is a mother's caution. Maybe it is that Warren has been pressing me more than usual about the estate, and I understand better than I used to what that pressure means. Whatever happened, I need you to know you are not a story someone invented. You are not a claim without foundation. You came from this family, from this land, from me. The ring has your initials and mine, and the name of this house, because I wanted you to be able to find your way back, no matter what. I wanted to make sure that even if I could not give you everything, I could give you that. Knowledge of where you came from. State, the house, the land, the collection your great-grandfather built, with 30 years of careful looking, all of it is yours by right and by my intention. Warren will fight it. He has been fighting the idea of you since he found out I was pregnant. He has told me you should not be registered, that it complicates things, that family property should stay undiluted. He used that word, undiluted, as if you were something added to water rather than what the water was for. Do not let him tell you who you are. You are Iris Rose Hartwell. This house has been waiting for you. I have been waiting for you. And whatever I could not give you in person, I leave in this letter and in the ring and in this land, which will not stop being yours, simply because someone decided to say otherwise. Come home. All my love, your mother, Margaret. The kitchen was entirely quiet. Outside the window, nothing moved in the dark except the tops of the oak trees, barely visible against the sky, swaying in a slow wind that had come up from the south. Agnes was standing near the stove. She had been there since Iris started reading, not speaking, not moving, just present in the way that people were present when they understood that what was happening was too large for conversation. Iris folded the letter and put it back in its envelope and held the envelope with both hands for a long time. She did not cry. She had learned early that crying in front of others cost something she did not always have to spend. But something was happening in her chest that had no other name except the particular grief of arriving somewhere 26 years late and finding that someone had been keeping the door unlocked the whole time. She looked at Agnes. "The lockbox," she said. "Do you have anything that might be the key?" Agnes opened the kitchen's miscellaneous drawer, the kind every old house had, packed with batteries and rubber bands and keys to doors that no longer existed. The back, on a small ring with a paper tag, was a brass key. The tag read, "Stone Shed, Iris." Agnes handed it across the table without a word. The key fit. Inside the lockbox, a birth registration form in Margaret's handwriting, listing the child as Iris Rose Hartwell, mother Margaret Rose Hartwell, date of birth April 12, 1999. Unsigned. Dated April 13, one day before Margaret died, never filed with the state. A sealed letter addressed to Warren Hartwell marked, "Concerning my daughter's inheritance, do not open unless you have given her what is hers." USB drive in a small plastic case labeled documentation. Photograph of Margaret, taken in the late stages of her pregnancy, standing on the front portico of Hartwell House, with one hand resting on her belly, and a look on her face that spoke of someone who had decided something permanent and was at peace with it. Underneath everything, a single folded sheet of paper with a combination of 8 numbers, and a note beside them, the collection, North Wing, for Iris. Louise's office was still lit when Iris pulled onto Main Street just before midnight. She knocked, and Louise opened the door and looked at what Iris was carrying and said simply, "Come in. We have work to do." Warren Hartwell's attorney called Louise at 8 the next morning. His name was Gerald Marsh, and he had represented the Hartwell estate for 19 years. And he had the voice of a man who had been winning arguments so long that the sound of opposition had become a professional amusement. He spoke for 4 minutes. The words defamation and tortious interference and misappropriation of estate assets, the last in reference to the ring, which Louise had already filed a notice about with the county court. Louise listened. She wrote 3 things on her notepad. When he finished, she said, "I will be filing a petition for DNA testing and a motion for full disclosure of estate financial records for the past 26 years by end of business Friday." She paused. "Also, Gerald, your client removed a piece of evidence from a third party's possession at a meeting I personally witnessed. I would suggest he locate the ring and return it, because the alternative is a motion for sanctions and a conversation about evidence tampering that none of us want before we have even reached the substance." She hung up and looked at Iris across the desk. "He will fight everything," she said. "Every motion, every request, every procedural step. He has money and time, and he is going to use both." Iris looked at the lockbox on Louise's desk. She thought about Margaret writing a letter in November of 1998, preparing for the possibility that something would go wrong, making sure her daughter would have a path back. She thought about the ring at the bottom of the river for 26 years, waiting for the water to drop. "He has had 26 years," she said. Louise held her gaze steadily. "So have you." The room above the hardware store was 12 feet by 14 feet, with a window that faced east and caught the morning light before anything else in town did. It was a single bed with a decent mattress, a wooden dresser with a crack running down the left side, a small table with 2 chairs, and a bathroom so narrow you had to step back to close the door. The radiator worked. The shower had hot water if you gave it 30 seconds to think about it. There was a hook on the back of the door where Iris hung her backpack each night, and for the first time, in longer than she could easily calculate, she had somewhere to hang it. Garrity, who owned the hardware store below, was a man of few unnecessary words. He had handed her the key the evening Louise called, shown her which step on the staircase had a loose board so she would not trip on it, and told her that if she needed anything from the store, she could put it on account and settle up when the time was right. Then he had gone back to the store without asking anything about her situation or her plans. She had not expected kindness without conditions. She was not sure what to do with it except to accept it, which she did. She was at Louise's office each morning at 8. Pace of the legal work was not the pace she had imagined, which is to say, it was slow and intricate and full of language designed to take simple facts and surround them with enough procedure that they became temporarily invisible. Warren's attorney filed 4 motions in the first week. A motion to dismiss the heirship petition on the grounds of insufficient evidence. A motion to bar any DNA testing of estate assets without a full evidentiary hearing first. A motion to strike Agnes Whitfield's anticipated testimony as interested and prejudiced, a motion requesting that the court require Iris to post a security bond of $50,000 against potential damage to the estate's interests before any further proceedings. Louise filed responses to all four with the efficiency of someone who had been expecting them and had drafted the responses before they arrived. She was calm about it in the way that experienced lawyers were calm, not because the situation was simple, but because she had been through enough complicated situations to understand that losing your steadiness in the early stages was how you made mistakes that mattered later. $50,000 bond motion was the most immediately dangerous. Iris had $412 in her checking account. Louise filed a response arguing that the bond requirement was punitive and without precedent in Virginia heirship proceedings, designed to price a legitimate claimant out of a case she had every right to pursue. She attached a copy of Margaret's letter to Iris, the birth registration form, and Iris's Foundling intake documentation from 1999 to the response. The judge, a woman named Patricia Sims, who had been on the Clark County bench for 11 years, reviewed the motion over a weekend and denied it on Monday morning. Warren was not pleased. On the Thursday of Iris's second week in Berryville, the Clark County Courier ran a brief item in its community news section. Did not name Iris directly, but described a woman in her 20s who had arrived in the county claiming connection to the Hartwell estate based on an item she said she had found in a river. The item quoted, without naming, a local businessman who said he hoped the courts would protect a beloved Clark County institution from predatory claims. Connie at the diner showed Iris the item over coffee on Friday morning with an expression that mixed anger with the resigned familiarity of someone who had seen this particular play before. "He has been feeding things to the Courier for 20 years, Connie said. Every time something came up about the estate that he did not like, a story appeared. She folded the newspaper with finality. People around here know where that kind of thing comes from." Iris read the item twice. The word predatory sat in the paper like something placed there with care, chosen for what it would call to mind. She thought about the group home in Manassas, about the rooms in other people's houses, about the parking lots, about all the ways a person's history could be assembled into an argument for why they deserved nothing. She finished her coffee and went back to Louise's office, and they kept working. DNA process moved on a separate track from the legal filings, quieter and more clinical. Louise had contacted a forensics laboratory in Richmond that handled estate and family law cases, and they had sent a collection specialist to Berryville on the Wednesday of the second week. The specialist, a woman named Dr. Chen, went through the sealed boxes of Margaret's clothing with gloved hands, selecting items that offered the best possibility of usable biological material. A wool coat, a hairbrush in a velvet bag that Agnes had sealed with the clothes, 2 items of clothing from later in the pregnancy that had been washed but not dry cleaned, which Dr. Chen explained preserved mitochondrial DNA differently than dry cleaning did. Iris provided her own sample, a cheek swab. Chen told her the lab would have results in 3 to 4 weeks, and that she would deliver them directly to Louise as the filing attorney. She was professional and thorough and made no comment on the outcome she expected, which Iris appreciated. It meant the results would be what they were and not what anyone wanted them to be. After Dr. Chen left, Agnes made tea and they sat on the step of the stone outbuilding in the afternoon sun, and Agnes talked about Margaret in the way she had not quite been able to in the kitchen with Louise present. Is smaller things. How Margaret had read with a flashlight under the covers as a child, and her grandfather had pretended not to know. How she had kept 3 horses and known each one by its moods the way you knew people. How she had spent 2 years in her 20s traveling through European museums and auction houses, learning everything she could about what her great-grandfather had built in the North Wing, so that she would be able to protect it properly when the time came. Collection, Iris said. Agnes nodded. Your great-grandfather's name was Edmund Hartwell. He made money in timber early in the century and spent a good portion of it over 30 years buying art and rare books and things he thought were worth preserving. He built the North Wing specifically for it in 1931, temperature-controlled even then, which was unusual at the time and expensive. The family kept adding to it. Margaret added to it herself in her 20s. She sealed it in 1997, updated the combination lock, and told no one the combination except that she had put it somewhere for her daughter to find. She paused and looked at Iris. Warren wanted to open it, many times over the years. He argued it needed to be appraised for estate purposes. Margaret told him the estate would not be settled until her daughter had the combination and could be present for the opening. He filed with the court twice to compel access. Both times the court declined, because Margaret's stated wishes, though informal, were on record through Agnes's affidavit. After Margaret died, Warren filed again. Court appointed an independent appraiser to assess what was known about the collection from historical records, but they did not compel the physical opening because Warren's own standing as administrator was still under challenge from a clause Margaret had written into the family trust. Could manage the estate's income-producing properties. He could not liquidate principal assets. What does he think is in there? Agnes was quiet for a moment. He knows the collection's rough historical value from the records his lawyers found. He has always known it was substantial. That is partly why he fought so hard to be appointed administrator, rather than simply letting the estate wind up. She paused. But I do not think he knows everything that is in there. Margaret made acquisitions in her 20s that she documented privately. Things she bought at private sales in Europe. She was very careful about what she told Warren. On the Friday of the 3rd week, Louise called Iris into her office and set the USB drive on the desk between them. Had sent it to a digital recovery specialist in Arlington the week before, not knowing if the drive still functioned after 26 years of storage in a metal box in a stone building. The specialist had called that morning to say it was intact. 17 files, mostly video. Louise had a laptop open. She looked at Iris. Do you want to do this alone or together? Together, Iris said. Then after a pause, please, the first file was dated April 8, 1999, 4 days before the birth registration form said Iris Rose Hartwell was born, 4 days before Margaret died. The video opened on Margaret Hartwell sitting at a desk, Iris recognized from photographs as the library desk on the ground floor of Hartwell House. She was visibly pregnant, her hands resting on the desk in front of her, wearing a dark green sweater. She was 34 years old, and she looked like someone who had been thinking very carefully about what she was going to say, and was now saying it. My name is Margaret Rose Hartwell, she said. I am recording this on April 8, 1999, at Hartwell House in Berryville, Virginia. I am of sound mind and in good health, as my doctor confirmed at my appointment 3 days ago. My daughter is expected within the week. Her name will be Iris Rose Hartwell, and she is the rightful heir to this estate and everything in it. Her voice was steady and clear and unhurried. She had a slight Virginia cadence, the vowels just long enough to place her. I am recording this because I am concerned about what may happen if something goes wrong. I am not expecting anything to go wrong. I intend to be alive for a very long time and to raise my daughter in this house, and to show her the collection her great-grandfather built, and to tell her the history of every piece in it. I intend to do all of that in person. But my cousin Warren has made it clear in ways both direct and indirect that he considers my daughter an obstacle to something he wants, and I am not comfortable proceeding without documentation of my intentions and my state of mind. She paused and looked at her hands. I want to say something for the record. Warren Hartwell is not a bad man in the common sense of the phrase. He is a man who has decided that what he wants is more important than what is right, and he has been making that decision for so long that I do not think he experiences it as a decision anymore. He has told me that an unmarried woman with no husband and a child on the way is not a responsible steward of a significant estate. He has told me that my daughter's parentage makes her claim to the family name questionable. Told me these things in polite language at dining tables and in lawyers' offices, and each time I have told him clearly that the estate is mine to leave to whoever I choose, and that I choose my daughter. She looked directly into the camera. She has always claimed, I want that on record. I am claiming her before she is born, because the world is full of people who will try to tell her otherwise, and I want there to be evidence that they are wrong. First video was 14 minutes long. Margaret talked about the estate, the collection, the trust her grandfather had established. She talked about Warren, specifically and without anger, the way a person spoke when they had moved past anger into something more durable. She mentioned 3 instances in which he had pressured her to remove Iris's anticipated inheritance from the estate's future, and she named dates and the names of the attorneys present. She mentioned a doctor in Winchester named Harold Boone, who she said had been approached by Warren to provide documentation suggesting the pregnancy was not viable. She said she had fired Dr. Boone as her physician and transferred her care to an OB in Leesburg, specifically because she did not trust anyone whose first loyalty might be to Warren. Louise stopped the video after the first file. She sat for a moment without speaking. Then she said, "This changes everything." Iris thought about how lonely it must have been to be pregnant and alone, and to know clearly what was circling around you, and to have no one to help you except a camera and a metal lockbox in a stone building. She said, "How many other videos are there?" Louise counted the files, 16 more. She looked at Iris. Some of these may be hard to watch. They went through 4 of the other videos that afternoon. The remaining ones they saved. Not because the content was unbearable, though some of it was close, but because there was a limit to how much of something this large a person could take in one sitting and still process correctly. Margaret appeared in each one with the same steady manner, the same careful organization of what she wanted to say. She talked about specific pieces in the collection, their provenance, and their value. She talked about the trust and how its distributions were meant to work. In the 4th video, she talked about Iris in a way that was not about the estate at all, just about her daughter, about what she hoped for her, about the room on the 3rd floor with the good morning light. She talked about names she had considered and why she had come back to Iris Rose each time. And she said the name the way people said names they had been turning over in their mouths for months, with a weight and a warmth that made it different from just a word. Louise closed the laptop gently after the 4th video. They sat in the quiet office for a moment. Outside on Main Street, a truck passed. Somewhere down the block, someone was moving furniture. "Took the ring," Iris said. "He took it out of my hand and walked out." Louise nodded. She watched him do it, did she not? Margaret. She knew he would be exactly that kind of person. Louise looked at her. Yes. She built you a record to fight it with, because she knew she might not be here to fight it herself. Iris went back to Agnes on the Saturday of the second week, and they spent the afternoon going through the remaining video files together. Louise had reviewed them all legally, but Iris had been saving some of them, not out of reluctance, but out of the instinct that there was a right order to things, that she needed to be in the right place before she could hold the rest of what was on that drive. The seventh video was the one Agnes had flagged. It was dated April 10, 1999, 2 days before Iris was born, 2 days before Margaret died. Margaret was at the same desk, but the afternoon light in this video was different, lower and more golden, suggesting late afternoon rather than morning. She looked tired in a way she had not looked in the earlier videos, the particular tiredness of late pregnancy that settled around the eyes and softened everything. She was wearing a gray sweater and her hair was down rather than up. She talked for 11 minutes. Most of it was practical, the location of the lockbox key in the kitchen drawer, the name of the OB in Leesburg, the combination to the north wing, stated a second time in case the written copy was ever lost. Then, toward the end, she stopped talking about practical things and looked at the camera for a moment without speaking. She said, "I want to say something that is just for you, not for the courts, not for the attorneys. Just for you." She was quiet for another moment. "I do not know what your life has been like by the time you find this. I hope it has been good. I hope someone found you quickly and kept you safe and gave you love without conditions. But I know the world well enough to know that might not have happened, and if it did not happen, I want you to hear this from me directly. Nothing that happened to you is your fault. Not being given away and not being found and not whatever hard things came between those 2 points and now. None of that is about your worth or your right to be here. Those things happened because I am not there, not because you are not enough." Her voice held steady, barely. "You are Iris Rose Hartwell, and you come from people who built things meant to last. Your great-grandfather spent 30 years collecting what is in that north wing because he believed beautiful things deserved to be preserved. I spent 10 years learning what he built because I believed it deserved someone who understood it. Now it is yours because I believe you are the person it has been waiting for. Come find me in the things I left you. I am in the house and in the collection and in the land and in the ring and in this letter. I am in everything I could think to put myself into, so that you would know you were never not thought of. I love you. I have loved you since before you had a name." She reached forward and the video ended. Agnes had her hand pressed over her mouth, the same way she had in the kitchen on the first night. Afternoon light in the small office was the same low gold as the light in the video, autumn rather than spring, but the same angle, the same quality of late afternoon Virginia sun. Iris sat with the closed laptop in front of her and let herself be still for a while. She had been told by various people in various ways over 26 years that she was unclaimed, that she was someone no one had come back for. The absence of her parents was a fact about her, a defining fact, the kind that shaped what you could expect from the world. She had learned to work around that belief rather than trying to dismantle it, because dismantling it required evidence she had never had. She had evidence now. Margaret had loved her before she was born. Put that love into a ring and a lockbox and 17 video files and a combination to a wing full of things worth preserving. Had arranged for her to be found even from the impossibility of death, with the patience and thoroughness of someone who knew they might not get another chance. "Iris Rose Hartwell," she said aloud, alone in Agnes's kitchen. She said it the way Margaret had said it in the video, slowly, with weight, like a name that had always been there, waiting to be claimed. 3 days after they filed the videos as exhibits, Warren's attorney called again. Tone had changed. The professional amusement was still present, but thinner now, showing something beneath it that was closer to concern. Proposed a meeting. Informal discussion, he called it, between parties without prejudice, to see if there was a mutually agreeable resolution. Louise agreed to the meeting date and told Iris afterward that agreeing to the meeting meant nothing except that they would sit in a room and listen to what Warren thought he could offer, and that whatever he offered would tell them something useful about how badly he now understood his position. The meeting was in Marsh's Winchester office, a long drive through horse country on a gray October morning. Warren arrived separately from his attorney. He was dressed more carefully than he had been in the kitchen at Hartwell House, a dark suit, and he sat across the table from Iris and Louise with the posture of a man who had spent decades being the most important person in whatever room he occupied and was finding the current room disorienting. He offered to withdraw the motions. He offered a settlement in which Iris received a cash payment in exchange for withdrawing her claim and signing a release. He said this as if it were a generous and rational resolution. "What are you offering?" Louise said. "We are prepared to offer $800,000. Marsh had a folder open in front of him. Clean payment, no further litigation. Miss Vane walks away with financial security she would not otherwise have for years." Louise wrote something on her notepad and turned it so Iris could see. It said, "He is scared." Iris looked at Warren Hartwell, who was watching her face with the careful attention of a man reading conditions he could not entirely predict. She thought about the kitchen at Hartwell House and the ring going into his pocket. She thought about the word undiluted in Margaret's letter, and about Margaret sitting at a library desk in April of 1999 saying her daughter was always claimed, building the record against the people who would try to say otherwise. She said, "No." Warren blinked. Just the once, and then his expression settled back into its controlled surface. "I understand this feels significant to you. Whatever story you have been told, whatever you believe about your origins, this estate is a legal entity that has been under proper administration for 26 years. Courts do not simply overturn 26 years of settled administration because of a ring found in a river." "It is not just the ring," Louise said. "No," Warren said. "The videos." He said it flatly, without surprise, and that flatness confirmed what Iris had suspected since the kitchen, that he had known about the videos, had suspected they existed, had hoped they were gone. Margaret was very thorough, Iris said. Something moved across Warren's face. Not guilt exactly, but the shape that guilt left behind in people who had spent years converting it into something else. He stood. "We will see you in court." He drove back to Berryville through the gray October morning, and, Louise said, when they crossed back into Clark County, "He knows he is losing the DNA argument. The offer was not about money. It was about finding out how much you knew and whether you could be moved. The answer to both questions is now clear to him." 2 weeks later, the DNA results came back. Louise called Iris at 7 in the morning. "Come to the office." The specialist from Richmond had sent the full report overnight, and Louise had the printed pages spread across her conference table when Iris arrived. She walked her through the technical language in plain terms: mitochondrial DNA markers, maternal line comparison, statistical probability. The report's conclusion was expressed in the language that forensic reports used, precise and absent of drama. The biological sample provided by the subject, designated Iris Vane, is consistent with maternal descent from the biological source material attributed to Margaret Rose Hartwell. Probability of a random match is calculated at less than 1 in 450 million. Louise looked up from the report. "It does not get more conclusive than this. For practical purposes, this is confirmation. Iris Vane is Margaret Hartwell's biological daughter. The words were simple. The room was small. Outside, Main Street was waking up, the sound of Ed opening the hardware store below drifting up through the floor, the ordinary sounds of a county town beginning its Tuesday. Iris sat in the chair across from Louise and let the information complete itself inside her. She had known it already. She had known it since the ring, or before the ring, in the way that people sometimes knew things they could not yet prove and had to hold carefully until the proof arrived. But knowing and confirmed were different weights. And the confirmed version settled into her differently, with a finality that the knowing had not carried. She was Margaret Rose Hartwell's daughter. She was Iris Rose Hartwell. 26 years after she had been found in a hospital waiting room 60 miles from here, carrying a name assembled from other people's generosity that was simply and completely true. Louise filed the DNA results with the court the same day. She also filed a petition to compel the opening of the North Wing collection for formal appraisal, citing the combined evidence of the DNA match, the birth registration form, the videos, and the combination recovered from the lockbox as grounds for establishing Iris as the legitimate heir for whose benefit the collection had been sealed. Warren's attorney filed an objection. Judge Sims reviewed the filing and the objection over 3 days. On the 4th day, she issued an order. The north wing of Hartwell House was to be opened in the presence of Louise Pemberton as Iris's legal representative, an independent appraiser appointed by the court, and a representative of the state attorney's office, within 14 days. Warren Hartwell had 14 days to prepare for the beginning of the end of his administration. The morning they opened the north wing, the weather had turned properly cold for the first time, a November chill with a low gray sky and frost on the grass of the formal garden. Iris arrived at Hartwell House at 9 with Louise and Agnes, who had dressed as if for something formal. The court's appraiser was a woman named Dr. Sandra Reeves, who ran the largest art appraisal firm in the Mid-Atlantic and had been appointed specifically because of her expertise in collections of this scope. The state attorney's representative was a younger man named Craig Hollis, who carried a camera and a legal pad and looked at everything twice before writing it down. Warren was there with Marsh. The court order required his presence as current administrator. He stood near the house's front door, hands in his coat pockets, watching Iris walk up the gravel drive. He said nothing when she passed him. Agnes led them through the house, past the dust-covered furniture and the silent rooms, to the north wing. The wing had its own entrance from the interior, a heavy door of reinforced oak at the end of a corridor on the ground floor, fitted with a combination lock that was conspicuously newer than everything around it. Margaret had replaced it in 1997, Agnes confirmed, and the combination had never been shared. Iris stood in front of the door. She had the number on the folded piece of paper from the lockbox. She had been carrying it in her jacket pocket for 3 weeks, not looking at it, waiting for this. She unfolded it now. Digits, written in Margaret's handwriting, Iris's birth date, April 12, arranged in a sequence only Margaret would have chosen. She put the combination in. The lock clicked open, smooth and clean, as if it had been maintained in the very act of waiting. The door swung inward. The air that came out was different from the rest of the house. Cooler, controlled, with none of the mustiness that came from rooms that had been closed too long without proper ventilation. The climate system Margaret had installed in 1997 had been running continuously on a timer-based power circuit that drew from the house's electrical supply. 26 years of running quietly in the dark, keeping the temperature at 62 degrees and the humidity at 45%, protecting what was inside against time. Stepped in. The north wing was not a single room. It was a series of connected spaces, each one purpose-built for a different type of collection. The first room was a gallery, roughly 40 feet long and 20 wide, with track lighting that came on automatically when the door opened, flooding the space with warm, calibrated light. The walls were hung with paintings from floor to ceiling, each one in its frame, each one with a small archival card attached listing the title and the year of acquisition. Dr. Reeves walked in and stopped. She stood in the entrance to the gallery and looked at the walls and said nothing for a long moment. "Good Lord," she said eventually, which was not the professional language of appraisers, but was honest. Iris stood in the middle of the room and turned slowly, trying to take in what she was seeing without reducing it to something her mind could not yet hold. The paintings were American, mostly. The great tradition of American landscape and figure painting running from the mid-19th century to the mid-20th. Mountains painted in the manner of the Hudson River School, the light thick and golden above dark valleys. Coastal scenes with water that seemed to move, figures in domestic interiors rendered in the soft American Impressionist mode that caught afternoon light in a particular way. A large canvas near the far end of the gallery showed a woman reading in a garden, her hat casting a shadow across her face, her shoulders relaxed in the way people's shoulders were when they were alone and did not know they were being watched. "Sergeant," Dr. Reeves said, standing beside Iris now and looking at the reading woman. She was quiet for a moment. "That is a sergeant, and that one over there." She pointed to a smaller canvas, a coastal view. "That is a Winslow Homer I have been looking for in the literature for 9 years. It was sold at a private sale in London in 1961 and has not appeared on the public record since." She looked at the archival card, Edmund Hartwell, London, 1961. She closed her eyes briefly. "Yes." They moved through the gallery. "Doctor." Reeves identified as she walked, naming artists the way someone named old friends encountered unexpectedly. Mary Cassatt, 3 works, 2 of them unrecorded in the public catalogue. Thomas Eakins, a portrait. George Inness, 2 landscapes. At the end of the gallery, behind a partition, a smaller group of European works that Margaret had acquired in her 20s. 2 Barbizon landscapes, a Boudin beach scene. A small Pissarro of a village market, authenticated by a Paris dealer in 1993. Doctor. Reeves moved through the collection with her camera and her recorder, speaking her observations aloud, her voice becoming more measured as the weight of what she was cataloging became clearer. The second space adjoined the gallery through an open arch. It held the books and manuscripts, shelves running floor to ceiling, each volume in its archival sleeve. Doctor. Reeves brought in a rare books specialist, she had called that morning, a man who drove from Washington and arrived looking slightly stunned when he walked into the room. He moved along the shelves slowly, pulling volumes with gloved hands, first editions. Some of them presentation, copies with the author's hands in the front matter. Shakespeare folio that was not the first but was the second, which was rarer in this condition. Separate locked cabinet held manuscript material, correspondence from figures whose handwriting the specialist identified with increasing excitement. Third space held jewelry and silver. Margaret had not added much to this part. Edmund and his wife had built it, pieces from the early 20th century and earlier, preserved as their value became apparent. The fourth space held documentation. Margaret's own records of her acquisitions, neatly filed provenance paperwork for every piece she had added, purchase receipts and authentication certificates in archival folders organized chronologically. Decades of Edmund's original paperwork filed alongside it. Iris went through this room more slowly than any of the others, not because the objects here were valuable in the way the paintings were valuable, but because this was where Margaret's mind was visible. The organization of the files, the notes in the margins of the paperwork, the way she had understood what her great-grandfather had built and had worked to extend it with care rather than just adding to it for the sake of adding. She had been building something deliberately for her daughter. Dr. Reeves spent 4 hours in the collection on the first day and came back for 2 additional days before she was ready to give a preliminary estimate. She sat with Louise and Iris and Craig Hollis in Hartwell House's library and went through her figures with the careful qualifier that everything was preliminary and that the full appraisal would take 6 months. That said, the paintings and works on paper, based on current auction records for comparable works and the exceptional condition maintained by the climate system, she estimated somewhere between $160 and $200 million. The Homer and the Sergeant alone, if they performed as she expected at auction, would together account for perhaps $60 million of that figure. The rare books and manuscripts were estimated at between $28 and $40 million. Several items needed further authentication that could increase the figure substantially. The financial trust established by Edmund Hartwell in 1955 had compounding for 69 years. The analyst's preliminary estimate was between $140 and $160 million, noting that a full forensic accounting was needed to determine how much of the trust's income stream had been drawn against by Warren's administrative fees over 26 years. The land and property, the house on 340 acres, was assessed at between $9 and $12 million in current condition. 3 antique vehicles in the barn, a 1932 Packard Twin 6, a 1929 Rolls-Royce Phantom I, and a 1936 Cord 8 and 10 came in at $12 to $14 million. Personal property, the jewelry and silver, and separate investment accounts Margaret had maintained in her own name, brought the remaining figures to something in the range of $30 to $40 million. Dr. Reeves looked up from her notes. Total preliminary estimate, she said, is somewhere between $380 and $450 million. For planning purposes and for the court filing, I would use $420 million as the central estimate. The room was quiet. Agnes was sitting in the corner of the library, the same way she had stood in the corner of the kitchen the first night, and her face held what it always held, the particular composure of someone who had been carrying a very large thing for a very long time and had just set it down. Iris sat with the number and thought about the $14.75 an hour she had been earning 2 months ago, standing ankle-deep in a river, pulling knotweed, and trying to make the math work for another week. She thought about the ring in the silt, barely visible, curved edge, showing above the riverbed where 26 years of river movement had finally worked it close enough to the surface that a hand reaching into the right spot on a drought year Wednesday could find it. She thought about Margaret saying, "She is always claimed." Warren Hartwell was in the hallway when they came out of the library. He had not entered the north wing. He had stood in the hallway for 3 days while the appraisal team worked, which was his right as current administrator, but he had not entered the wing that bore the combination his cousin had refused to share with him. He looked at Iris when she came out. She had the preliminary appraisal summary in her hand. He looked at the page and then at Iris's face. He did not say anything. Attorney was at his elbow and did not say anything either. Iris looked at him for a moment. Then she looked past him at the front door and the gravel drive beyond it and the oak trees that lined it all the way to the road. "I will need the ring back," she said. Warren reached into the breast pocket of his suit jacket and held out the ring. His hand was steady. She took it from him without touching his palm. The way you took things from people when the taking was its own statement. He turned it to the engraving, I.R.V. Hartwell, you are always claimed, MH 1999. 26 years in a river and 26 years waiting in this house, both of them waiting for the same person to arrive. Now she had. The hearing was scheduled for the second Tuesday of December, which meant Iris had spent 6 weeks in Clark County. By the time she walked up the courthouse steps in Berryville on a morning cold enough that her breath came out in clouds, Louise walked beside her, carrying the same leather briefcase she carried every day, the kind that showed its age without apologizing for it. Agnes was already inside, seated in the second row of the gallery, with her hands folded in her lap, wearing her good coat. Clark County Courthouse was a brick building from 1922. It smelled of floor polish and old paper and the particular sealed warmth of buildings that had been keeping people's most difficult moments on record for over a century. Judge Sims entered at 9 sharp with the efficiency of someone who had read the entire case file and came in already knowing most of what she would hear. Warren was there with Marsh and 2 associates. He had dressed with even more care than he had in Winchester. The suit a darker blue, the tie a subdued burgundy, the posture of a man presenting himself as the steady adult in a room that contained, in his framing, a young woman who had stumbled into something she did not understand. Iris had learned to read these performances over the weeks of the proceeding, not with contempt exactly, but with the clarity that came from watching the same play enough times to know all the lines. Gerald Marsh opened with a motion to limit the evidence. He argued the video recordings were prejudicial, that Margaret's mental state at the time of recording could not be verified, that the recordings had been made without legal supervision, and could not be authenticated. He argued this with precision and force, the way he argued everything, as if forces of presentation could do the work that force of logic could not. Louise rose to respond. She cited the authentication provisions that applied to self-recorded statements in Virginia probate proceedings. She cited the corroborating physical evidence, the birth registration form in Margaret's hand, the lockbox with the key Margaret had specifically labeled, the combination to the north wing written in Margaret's documented handwriting. She cited the DNA results, which Marsh had not been able to challenge on any substantive ground. Judge Sims denied the motion to limit. Her reasoning was brief and pointed. The identity of the person in the recordings had been confirmed by multiple independent sources, including Agnes Whitfield, who had known Margaret Hartwell for 30 years. The content was corroborated by physical evidence already in the record. The fact that the recordings were private and unobserved at the time of making was not a deficiency, but a feature, in that it meant there had been no occasion for performance for an external audience. She looked over her reading glasses at Marsh and said the recordings would be played. First video played in full. Margaret's voice in the courtroom. I am recording this because I am concerned about what may happen if something goes wrong. Her face on the screen above the evidence table, the careful steadiness of someone building something meant to last. The second video played in full, the one dated April 10, the one that was not for the courts. I want to say something that is just for you. Iris did not look at the screen while the second video played. She looked at the wood grain of the table in front of her. She had watched it enough times by now that she knew the cadences, knew where Margaret's voice was going to slow and where it was going to hold. She did not need to see it. What she needed was to sit with it playing in the room and let it be official, let it be on record, let the version of Margaret that had spoken into a camera in early April of 1999 exist in this courthouse, in this county, in the way that things existed when courts acknowledged them. When the second video ended, the room stayed quiet for a moment that was longer than courts usually stayed quiet. Then someone in the gallery coughed, and the moment passed, and Marsh began his rebuttal. But the rebuttal was smaller than his earlier arguments, as if the room had recalibrated around what it had just heard. Agnes testified. She was steady and direct, and answered every question Marsh put to her, without deflecting or elaborating beyond what was asked, the manner of someone who had been telling the truth about the same thing for 26 years and had no reason to change any part of it. When Marsh suggested her memory might be colored by affection for Margaret, she looked at him for a moment and said, "I know what I saw and what I was told and what I kept. I have kept it carefully for 26 years because I believed the person it was kept for would eventually come." She looked at Iris. She came. Louise's closing was shorter than Marsh's. She said the evidence established Iris Rose Hartwell's identity beyond any reasonable legal standard. She said, Margaret Hartwell had done everything a person could do to protect her daughter's claim, short of surviving to deliver it personally. She said the word settled did not mean the same thing as the word correct, and that a legal position maintained through fraud and false documentation was not settled in any meaningful sense. Then she sat down. Judge Sims did not take a recess. She looked at her notes for perhaps 2 minutes, which in courtrooms felt considerably longer. Then she looked up. "The evidence presented in this matter is not ambiguous," she said. "The biological connection between the petitioner and the late Margaret Rose Hartwell is established to a standard of scientific certainty. Documentary evidence confirms both the petitioner's identity and Margaret Hartwell's clear intent regarding her daughter's inheritance." She paused. "The petition is granted. Iris Rose Hartwell is confirmed as the legitimate sole heir to the estate of Margaret Rose Hartwell. Current administration of that estate is hereby revoked effective immediately, and a court-supervised transition will be initiated within 30 days. She looked at Warren Hartwell without expression. In addition, given the evidence introduced regarding the documentation submitted by the prior administrator in 2000, specifically the medical note claiming no viable pregnancy, I am referring this matter to the state attorney's office for review of potential fraud in a probate proceeding. A forensic accounting of all administrative fees and disbursements from the estate from 1999 to the present will be ordered as part of the transition process." Gavel came down. The sound of it in that small county courthouse was not dramatic. It was just a sound, the ordinary sound of a proceeding ending, a decision made. But Iris felt it in her chest like something coming loose that had been held tight for a very long time. Agnes was crying in the gallery, not loudly, just steadily, with the relief of someone who had carried something until they could not carry it anymore, and had finally found the place to set it down. Louise gathered her papers without hurry. She looked at Iris and said, simply, "That is what it looks like when you win. The forensic accounting took 3 months. Picture that emerged was not surprising, but it was specific, and the specificity was what mattered. Warren Hartwell had drawn administrative fees within accepted parameters in his first year. Over the following years, the rate had increased, reaching $23,500 annually by 2015. The accounts also showed payments to a consulting firm in Alexandria appearing in the estate's records from 2003 onward. When the forensic team traced the firm's ownership, they found it registered to Warren's wife. $11,000 per year for 20 years, $220,000 paid from the estate to a company that existed primarily on paper. There was also the matter of the farmland lease rates. When the forensic team compared them to comparable farmland rates in Clark County over the same period, they found that the Hartwell rates had been set at between 15 and 22% below market for most of the period, benefiting 3 agricultural operations with prior business relationships to Warren's family. Harold Boone, the doctor whose note had claimed Margaret's pregnancy was not viable, had retired to Charlottesville. Subpoenaed records showed a payment of $12,000 from Warren Hartwell's personal account to Boone's practice in September of 1999. Payment had no documented medical basis. Margaret had terminated her relationship with Boone months before giving birth. $12,000 payment occurred 3 months after Margaret's death. Total identified excess and improperly extracted value was approximately $2.4 million over 26 years. Warren lost the Alexandria house in the civil recovery action the following spring, valued at $2.1 million, purchased in 2004 with funds the forensic team established had been partially drawn from excess estate fees. He was not imprisoned. Criminal threshold for estate fraud in Virginia required a level of intent documentation the state attorney determined was not quite achievable given the age of the records. He was found civilly liable, ordered to pay restitution, and his name was removed from every Clark County board and committee he had served on, which in a small county amounted to a significant portion of his public identity. County learned the way small counties learned things, which was gradually and then all at once. Warren came to Hartwell House once in late January. He called ahead through Marsh to say he wished to collect some personal items. Louise reviewed the list. Iris said he could come. He arrived on a Thursday afternoon when the light was already going. Agnes stood in the doorway while he went through the boxes. Iris was in the kitchen when he finished. He came to the doorway and stopped. They looked at each other across the kitchen where Agnes had made tea on the first night, and Margaret's letter had been read, and the case had really begun. He said, "I want to tell you something." She waited. "I did not know for certain that you existed," he said. "When Margaret died, I suspected. But I told myself that suspicion was not the same as knowledge, and that if you had existed and been properly documented, you would have appeared. I told myself that for 26 years. He paused. Iris looked at him. Then she said, "You paid Harold Boone $12,000 in September of 1999. The silence that followed was different from the silences earlier in the proceeding, which had been strategic, calculated. This one was honest. "Yes," he said. "Then you knew," she said, "not suspected. You knew." He looked at his hands, which were the hands of a 61-year-old man who had spent 26 years maintaining a position that was not his, and had now lost it along with most of what he had built on top of it. He did not say anything more. There was nothing to say that would change what had been done, or what had been taken, or what 26 years meant in the life of a person who had spent them not knowing where she came from. He left without a goodbye. The symmetry of it struck Iris only after his car had disappeared down the Oak Drive. She put on her coat and walked the property in the cold afternoon. The farmland to the east, the creek along the lower boundary, the stone wall at the edge of the formal garden, the 340 acres that was now hers in the way that things were yours when you had earned them through means other than money. She walked until the light was mostly gone, and then she came back and sat at Margaret's decks and let the quiet be quiet. She would be Iris Hartwell Vane. She had thought about it for weeks and come back to it each time. Both names, both parts of the history, the family she had come from, and the name she had carried through the years of not knowing, neither one erasing the other. Louise filed the legal name documentation in February. The judge who approved it noted that it was unusual, that claimants in heirship cases typically adopted the family name in full. Louise said her client had reasons for keeping both names, and the judge accepted that without further comment, because it was not the court's business what a person did with their own history as long as they documented it properly. The restoration of Hartwell House began in March. Iris hired a firm from Winchester that sent out an architect named Patricia Stover to do the initial assessment. Patricia walked every room and produced a report that ranked the work by urgency with the honesty of someone who had learned that clients needed accurate information more than they needed to feel good about what they were looking at. The roof needed sections replaced. The plumbing required a full overhaul. The electrical system needed to be brought to current standards. Kitchen needed to be made properly livable. Their first meeting, Iris said none of this was fast or cheap. Patricia looked at her and said, "You could restore the parts you need and leave the rest for later. Houses do not need to be finished all at once. They need to be cared for, which is different from being completed." They started with the roof and the plumbing and the kitchen, things that made a house safe and livable rather than the things that made it beautiful. The beauty could come afterward in the order that it was ready. She moved into the house in May, before the restoration was finished, because the kitchen was functional and the roof no longer leaked, and the south-facing bedroom on the third floor had been the first room Patricia's team had finished. Floors refinished to their original chestnut, walls painted a soft cream that picked up the morning light, the window rebuilt and cleaned clear. Agnes brought her the quilt from Margaret's old room, the hand-stitched one in the patterns that told stories. Iris was still learning to read. She laid it across the bed without ceremony, smoothing it at the corners with the matter-of-fact tenderness of someone performing a long-deferred act. "There," she said. She stood back and looked at the room. Then she looked at Iris with an expression that held everything it had been holding for a long time, without the need to name any of it. "It is right," Agnes said. "It is exactly right." Margaret's grave was in the small family cemetery at the west edge of the property. Behind a stone wall Agnes had maintained, as she maintained it, everything else, without fanfare and without neglect. Margaret's stone was simple. Her name, her dates, and below them a line Agnes had asked to be engraved there. "She is always claimed." Iris stood at the grave on a morning in late May when the apple trees had finished blooming and the grass was the particular green of early Virginia summer, and the Blue Ridge was sharp against a sky that went on past the point where looking became something closer to faith. She stood without speaking, the way you stood in places where speech was not the right instrument. She did not try to say everything. There was too much of it, and some of it was not yet words, and some of it would never be words, and that was acceptable. She said the name, her full name, Iris Rose Hartwell Vane, not for any audience, but because Margaret had put the name into the world, and it seemed right to say it here, in this place, where Margaret was. She said, "I found the ring." She said, "I came." She stayed a while longer. Then she walked back through the long grass toward the house. The foundation was Louise's suggestion initially, and then Iris's conviction, which was a different thing entirely. Louise had mentioned in passing that the estate's trust was generating income well in excess of what was needed for maintenance and restoration, and that there were significant tax advantages to establishing a charitable organization. She had been careful to frame it as a tax matter and not a moral one, because she had learned over 6 months of working with Iris that she made her own decisions about what mattered. But Iris had already been thinking about it. Since the night in Agnes's kitchen when she read Margaret's letter and sat in the quiet and thought about all the years between the hospital waiting room and this table, about the 4 foster placements and the group home and the careful arithmetic of the parking lots, about every kid she had known at every stop who was doing the same arithmetic and had no reason to expect it to end differently than it began. The foundation she established in June was small. Not small as an apology, but small as an acknowledgement that starting small and doing it correctly was better than starting large and getting it wrong. Purpose was specific. Every young person in Virginia who aged out of the foster care system without a stable housing placement would be eligible to apply for a housing stipend of $3,000, enough to cover a first month and security deposit on a modest rental, plus a 6-month support arrangement to help with job applications and benefits navigation, and the bureaucratic maze that confronted people who had no family infrastructure to help them decode it. The foundation did not promise to solve everything. Promised to cover the first drop, the one from the group home doorstep to the sidewalk with a box of belongings, which was the one that most reliably determined what came after. First year, the foundation served 43 young people in Virginia. The second year, 78. Third year, they expanded to 2 neighboring states with a waiting list that told Iris more than any other metric about what was needed and how much of it there was. A reporter named Claire asked Iris why she had chosen to stay in Clark County rather than taking the estate's assets and building a different life somewhere else. Iris thought about it before answering. Then she said, "Because someone held this place for me for 26 years. Because Agnes swept a room on the 3rd floor regularly for 26 years against the possibility that I would need it. Because Ed Garrity rented me a room without asking questions. Because Connie at the diner called Louise without being asked." She paused. Places are what people make them. People here made this one worth coming to and worth staying in. Claire asked, "What would you tell someone in the situation you were in 6 months ago?" Iris said, "Look in the rivers, not literally. But look in the places where things end up when they have been in the current for a long time. Things that were meant for you have a way of coming up when the conditions are right. The work is making sure you are somewhere near when they do." The painting went above the fireplace in the main room of the restored house, which surprised Patricia Stover and which the appraiser said was not ideal for preservation purposes, and which Iris did not change her mind about. The reading woman in the garden, her hat brim casting shadow, her shoulders easy in the afternoon light. The painting had been in the north wing for 60 years, preserved correctly. It was a painting of a person who was alone and at peace with it, and Iris wanted to see it every day in a room she lived in, rather than knowing it was properly maintained behind a door she had to open to enter. Agnes came in from the kitchen and looked at it. She would have liked that, Agnes said. Margaret. Psh, she always wanted the collection to be lived with rather than just kept. Iris looked at the woman in the painting, the shadow and the ease, the book held with both hands. She thought about all the ways this painting had waited, and buying it and placing it in the north wing for preservation. Margaret knowing it was there and building that knowledge into what she was passing forward. The painting, sitting in the correct temperature for 26 years while the world moved on above it. She thought, some things wait. The ring was on her finger. She had been wearing it since the day she took it back from Warren in the hallway. Fit her right hand. The third finger, which was not the traditional placement for anything, but which was where it sat correctly, the gold worn smooth from decades of use before it had spent its years in the river. Engraving on the inside was not visible when she wore it. But she knew it was there. Turned against her skin, the words in permanent contact with the person they had been waiting for. R.V. Hartwell, you are always claimed, M.H. 1999. She wore it on a September morning in the second year, standing at the window of the south-facing room on the third floor, drinking coffee while the morning light came over the Blue Ridge and moved across Clark County the way it came every morning, indifferent and clean and entirely itself. Below the window, the formal garden was in the last weeks of its summer fullness. Beyond the garden wall, the farmland ran to the east, the hay fields cut, the creek visible by the line of cottonwoods at the property's lower boundary. The Blue Ridge was blue, was always blue in the mornings, the distance rendering the ridge into color rather than shape, the particular blue that had no other name than the name of the mountains themselves. She had been in this room 4 months. Long enough to know the sounds of the house at night, the creak of the third step from the top of the staircase, the way wind sounded different coming from the west than from the north. The quality of silence before dawn, when even Agnes was not yet moving. Long enough to know she was not going to wake up somewhere else. That the room would be there in the morning, and the window would face south, and the mountains would be the same blue they had been the day before. This was not a temporary arrangement or a grace that could be withdrawn by someone else's decision. It was hers, legally, concretely documented in courts and county records. But more than that, it was hers in the way Margaret had meant when she wrote the word claimed, not assigned or allocated or permitted, claimed. Active tense, the present tense, the permanent tense that made belonging a state rather than a permission. She thought about the Wednesday in July when she had been standing in a river doing work that had nothing to do with this, when the only future she could see clearly was another day of knotweed and another week of wages and the careful arithmetic of a life that did not add up to anything beyond its own continuation. She thought about the curved edge in the silt, barely visible, which she had almost thrown back. About all the ways it could have stayed in the river. All the years it had stayed in the river, working its way slowly through the silt while the world above it moved forward, and the estate sat in its suspension, and Agnes swept a room and kept waiting. 26 years of patience on multiple sides, some of it chosen and some of it imposed, all of it ending on a Wednesday in July when the water was low and a hand reached into the right place. She thought about Margaret at the desk in April of 1999, building the record with the thoroughness of someone who understood that thoroughness was a form of love, naming every piece of evidence, naming every threat. Her daughter in a recording that a court would play in a county courthouse 26 years later as proof of what had always been true. She thought, I found you too. Not the ring, not the house, not the estate held in a north wing on a climate control timer. Margaret. She had found her mother in the videos and in the letter and in the room that had been swept clean in readiness, and in the ring turned against her skin right now with the words that had been true before she was born and had stayed true through everything that followed. She had come from somewhere. She belonged to something. She was not assembled from pieces of other people's generosity, or rather she was that and also more than that. She was Iris Rose Hartwell Vane, which was both names, both parts of the history, the family she had come from, and the years she had made herself from what was available, neither one negating the other. Both of them true at the same time, the way things were true when they did not need to compete for the same space. Agnes was moving in the kitchen below. Foundation's second-year report was on the desk behind her. She turned away from the window and set down the coffee cup and picked it up to read before the morning meeting. There was work to do. There was always work to do, and she had learned in the past year that work done in a place you belonged to felt different from work done to stay ahead of the thing behind you. Not easier, different. The effort, pointing towards something, rather than just away from something else. The Blue Ridge held its color outside the window, patient and blue and permanent. The same mountains that had been there when Margaret stood at this window, when Edmund stood at this window, when the Hartwells before them looked at a ridge line that had always been there. Iris looked at the report in her hands. Then she sat down at the desk and began to read. Stories like this remind us that starting over is terrifying, but it is always possible. If you or someone you love is facing a total reset right now, whether from a divorce, a loss, or a financial disaster, you need a plan. Scan the QR code on your screen or click the link below to get the Phoenix Blueprint for just $17. It gives you the exact steps you need to take in the first 48 hours and a 90-day plan to get your independence back. Thank you for watching.